most desperate nightmares. Archibald entered the office of the provost without a knock. Micolash's head shot up from a document he was engrossed with. He had been deeply frowning, but turned it instantly upon seeing him, and proceeded to stand and extended his arm to welcome him. "Ah, Archibald. Good, good. Do come in. A beverage, perhaps?" No, thank you." "All right. Please, sit down." He shook his hand, then they both sat on each side of his desk. "Pardon me if I jump straight into business, but these are fascinating things you have observed." He leaned forward a bit to glance down at the papers Micolash had in front of him. Yes. He felt a bit distracted. There was of course a lot to think about, to look over and consider. But in the past it had never made such an impact on his demeanor. The concern likely only furthered his stunted attitude. He had evidently fallen silent, as Micolash raised his eyebrows respectfully at him and continued. "Well, as I have read it all, am I correct in saying it is funds you lack?" Yes. Indeed, very much lacking. The church board has given me plenty of reasons lately. I get the impression they want to be rid of me. "Oh, you are being too harsh. I'm sure they have plenty on their plate as it is. I assume it was them that told you to submit it to us? Here at Menzies?" No. That was my own initiative. True, I might overstate things. But they simply don't understand the potential of this. Now, I don't want to come across as some loon, but the little I have gleaned in my own experiments proves that a manipulation, a control of light is achievable. "Oh, say no more, friend." Micolash politely spoke out, calmly motioning with his hands. Archibald realized that his tone might have gotten a bit out of control. "I and many others have read this, and we agree. It is an impressively written thesis. We do seem to share your optimism for potential." "Oh, you do?" "We most certainly do. Now, He looked down at the papers, but quickly enough so it appeared more like he pretended to read them. "You mentioned a lack of facilities." "Yes, indeed. I must be able to house my specimens." "Might I ask how large of a space that might be?" "Well, quite large." The provost nodded to himself. But not to worry. I have plenty of prototypes to show. I have...
No. Don't get ahead of yourself, Mr. Archibald.
I was just hoping you could clarify that this subject, Parl, is this dark beast you have so extensively documented. Oh, it certainly is, but not nearly as documented as it could be. You see, I need a living, sparking dark beast. To harness the light, of course, to see how she... it does it. Uh-huh. Well, it all seems fine to me. It is definitely an avenue we at Mensis are curious about exploring. You need to acquire this subject then, I'm sure? Yes, as soon as possible. If that could be arranged. We would need to find one, of course, and have personnel agree to, well, retrieve it in an efficient fashion. But if that is what you require, we will start right away to see how we can assist. Archibald leaned back in his seat with a sigh of relief. He had not realized how hunched forward he had been. But he never spotted any indication that the provost was alarmed by how he carried himself. Oh, how fortunate. You don't know what a relief it is to finally... to finally feel that my work can flourish. We at Mensis might be more aware than you think. Ha! I believe you are correct, Master Micolash. To tell you the truth, I suspect the church suppressed my work so that I would stick around for their sake, conducting those freakish experiments on scourge patients. Leave that to a doctor, I'd say. You must have been quite proficient at it, then. I suppose in some capacity I was. Whatever happened to the good old days? When Mensis seemed like just a door away. Those charming conversations with Master Luna, rest her soul, is what enabled me to balance my work. Yes, I know what you mean. My guess is the new Vicar Oscar is occupied by other matters. We must all, of course, assist the people. But within our own agency, don't you think? He nodded calmly, looking like he was smirkingly reminiscing. Agreed. Besides, we here at Mensis still carry the legacy of what started the institution of the Healing Church. The work that began at Bergenworth. Professor Gordon opened the door slightly to confirm the whereabouts of the provost. There he was indeed, observing the procedure with some of his closest bootlickers. He entered, lacking the regards for any disturbance he might cause. They all cast him a disinterested look. Still conducting these? He asked scornfully, while approaching the glass window. They had a view down onto the research amphitheater. Right below their window was the floor on which 2 beds stood, and further ahead was the observation seats that became gradually wrapped in darkness. Around the center floor were mirrors positioned. The only light source came from 2 constructs that were made out from a central cylinder. At the top was a tall dome shape, below which 4 narrow panels emerged evenly placed around it. Beneath the frame of the tall umbrella dome was flickering sparks that periodically caused the room to become brighter in blue colors. On the 2 beds lay a man and a woman. His knowledge distinguished them as a subject and mystic. 2 men stood behind a frame at the base of each construct, focused on maintaining the flow of sparks. Directly above the heads was a circular frame hanging in the ceiling with a glass panel held within. Occasionally the blue sparks were observed dancing over the ring briefly. "Whatever do you mean?" Micolash's attention was still mostly held by the display when Gordon came to stand beside him, crossing his arms. "I, for one, still see many answers to be found."
Indeed, questions and answers all over the world. But isn't this dream thesis demanding too much attention? I agree with your statement, but perhaps it is better let proceed more adequately. Wouldn't you agree, gentlemen?
He mainly addressed the fellows in the room beside the provost. He knew he could afford the luxury of being quite nasty with his statements and their implications without social repercussions. Years dedicated to one establishment tends to come with such perks. They did not, however, reply, only nodded their heads carefully.
Mr. Micolash, one cannot force the answers. The conduction of light in this manner is equally revolutionary to other fields. Harnessing the power may lead to an improvement to every man's life, not just the discovery of a greater nature.
Such research demands much less resources to still be fruitful. The willing minds could easily begin a parallel inquiry.
True said. Yet too much resources are spent on this single query. With all due respect, insight cannot be forced. It took myself a lifetime to understand something so simple. It requires several overlooks and examinations to be abandoned in pursuit of other things and later returned to with additional facts. And more often than not, answers are often found in unassuming places.
Micolash never wavered his attention from the procedure. As provost, one must always have the grand scale of things in mind. Then, unfortunately, some things are rendered irrelevant.
And what is the grand scale, might I ask?
The procedure must have caused Micolash some distress, as his brow had furrowed more and more. Surely it was only coincidental that the furrowing had begun when he had walked in. It was admittedly obviously wicked, but Gordon could not resist to smirk.
Is there a concern you wish to voice, Professor? Well, now that you mention it, have not a line been crossed? These procedures, how many times have not these bolts caused harm to the subjects? They are in agreement and are fully aware of the risks. None is pressured. Well, perhaps not. Then again, despite the risks, for some the compensation paints them a fool if refused. If you have skipped the latest papers, progress is made. Dreams can be directly altered by a third party due to the conduction of light. Now we need to conclude that this process is in fact governed by a part of the brain. The amygdala? And how many studies have explored it? I am only aware of one somewhat serious analysis. Then you should give it more validation. The vicar had a brilliant mind. Then how come Provost Luna never explored it? On that note, you saw her brief research into cursed infants. A fascinating subject, to be sure, but she did not linger. She laid a foundation and established a scenario, then moved on, leaving others to pick up the trail as it suited their own ends. It goes without saying, 'tis how science work. It's a collaboration, especially within our own school. The provost must simply coordinate and give freedom to the scholars. Then how come she chose me and not you? Gordon did not reply. He did not need to. He had suddenly realized the true depths of Provost Micolash' curious mania. Through his office door came a student with a wrapped folder. The, result reports from Master Catford, sir. Micolash motioned for him to enter, and the young man did so, hurrying up to the desk and laying the folder on the table while suffering from Micolash's intense glare. Just before he turned to leave, he was certain to have seen a hint of a leer on his face, but then he had vanished back through the door. The reports had become less frequent in their arrival, and now did not even the man himself deign to deliver them. He opened up the upper desk drawer and retrieved the last of the former headmistress Luna's notebook, currently in a more thumbed-through state than he had found it. Granted, nowhere was it mentioned seriously the significance of dreams, but it just had to be so.
even if it were not the case, something was reacting, sending signals back. What kind of fool could not acknowledge such a truth? And such a plain one to boot. Literal arms extending towards them, beckoning them, encouraging their attempts. He arrived at the last written page that ended halfway through. The rest was blank. In a disheartened fashion, he felt more kindred to the provost than ever. That they both were seemingly swallowed up, devoured by their efforts. He closed it and moved to the bookshelf, stopping with his face inches from the back of the book written so long ago by Vicar Lawrence. What had it demanded of them? What was their price for their insight? And why would it not come to him after all this time? In one swipe he had taken the book and thrown it across the room. When it only caused his chest to heave and voice to sound angrily grunting, he turned back and furiously vacated the entire shelf of books. He then proceeded to sweep his arms over the desk to remove everything that stood upon it. Afterwards, he remained seething and breathing like he was about to burst. The only thing swirling around in his mind was the idea that whatever Luna encountered in her last days was likely the cause of her sudden demise. But to Micolash, in a strange and macabre way, he thought it proper. For whatever she had done had overstepped the boundaries of man, taking her away into ideas loftier than he could ever conceive. Like her, he just had to take the first step. And Leica came in through the door. She stopped, having not anticipated to find Provost Micolash inside, alone. He was standing before a standing wall frame that surrounded a bed with inward-facing mirrors. One of the panels had been folded out, so one could access the lone bed standing within. On opposite side of the circle stood two of the spark devices. Master Micolash, are you to assist? Indeed. Please. He indicated towards the bed for her to lie in. She approached slowly. Oh. Well then? Nothing has changed. It is the same procedure. I just had a sudden urge to partake firsthand. So many observations tend to create unhealthy distance, as you can imagine. All right. Of course. Oh, never mind. He nodded and handed her the sedative that she drank swiftly. She walked through and sat down on the bed. It felt perhaps a bit strange since it was not much work required, essentially simply turning a device on and off, and keeping the meters in order during the session. Anyone could do it, so why not the provost himself? The room was a loft, with about 6 feet of straight wall, until the sloping of the roof began. Above her hung a round glass panel within a metal frame. The windows in the tilted ceiling were open, letting in the light of a sunny day that periodically grew obscure due to roaming clouds. He closed the panel, completing the circle of mirrors around her. She lay down comfortably and closed her eyes, letting the sedative carry her into slumber. She was working in a garden with a little boy, her son. Although she realized quickly that this was not her son, it was just a dream. She was usually very quick to realize when she was dreaming, but as always, it was hard to tell how long one had spent within such a state. She stood, while the boy continued digging a hole in the ground. There was no flowers around. They were in a vast forest, where an evenly cut grass lawn laid on the ground with several trees surrounding them so extensively she could not see if they ever ended. Above her was a canopy of dense leaves. She had a hard time locating the sun, as it seemed to move whenever she looked. The boy continued to work. His shirt had now changed, while she wandered away to explore the environment. She touched the trees, waiting for something to happen. It was hard to recall, since it was in a dream. It was as if she had a better sense of her memories from a previous dream. But she knew that it could take some time for the lightning to start to influence her perceptions. She constantly reminded herself of this, since each thought she had was very dominating and caused her to momentarily forget. But that was a trick to lucid dreaming, at least to her. She noted that the boy had vanished, and she walked over to where he had been. She heard a noise behind her. A large sound of dirt being moved. She turned to see that one of the trees started to rise up from the ground. It was in fact a slender arm with several limbs, reaching beyond her sight behind the canopy. The roots that were uprooting themselves were its fingers. This was the light's doing. She was sure of it, and it did not make her afraid. The hand emerged and turned around with its palm upwards, reaching for her. It was a completely new experience to her. Exciting, but a little frightening. Should she take it? She recalled the experiment, and that it was a dream, and she decided that she had no choice but to do it. Although, in comparison, one of its fingers was the size of her arm. She grabbed around the tip of the middle finger. The hand had 10 fingers, 2 of which were thumbs on both sides of the palm. It was as if her touch had frightened the being possessing the hand, for it jerked backwards. Whoever it was could likely not see her from above the canopy. There came a breeze, or so she thought, for it was just the sound of one. In reality, it was the entire canopy of leaves that started to move. A massive shadow fell over her, and she thought that someone was leaning in closer to find her. The hand turned around and pointed a finger at her. The long nail moved closer to her head, aiming for her forehead. Before it touched her, the massive hand spread out and wrapped around her, grabbing her and tossing her forward in its grip. She was completely blind as she flew past in a vast darkness. As if shoved out from behind a curtain, she stumbled forward, landing on her hands and knees. The ground was rocky, in both sight and sense. Everything, from the forceful pull to the ambient sounds around her, was just like waking up. Everything about what had just happened suggested she was in this moment wide awake. Her mind was clear and she recalled with full lucidity how she had not long ago began an experiment. She even recalled how Micolash had amusedly wanted to engage with the procedure. The dream she had just had was a bit foggy to her, as they normally are. But still, she was not convinced if she was awake. If that were the case, should she not have awakened back into the bed? And for that matter, back in the men's facility? When she turned up her head, she saw an entirely different landscape. One she had never seen before. It was filled with irregular rock formations that varied so vastly they appeared as one would imagine the landscape of clouds would be, when the clouds are especially detailed and numerous, like forming mountains in the sky. Massive stones dotted the landscape before her, and despite the many alien aspects to it, it was very normal. There was a normal sky. The ground felt normal, and she heard a wind blowing. She stood, realizing that her efforts must have been successful. It made her smile and jumpy with excitement. The fact that she was alone dampened it somewhat. How she should return to Menzies did not bother her, for she had a whole new land to explore. Amidst the small stone monuments standing dense like bushes, be they naturally shaped or not, was a clear path that she started walking down, eager to see where the dreamlands would take her. After Micolash had closed the panel, he walked over to one of the mechanisms. He cranked the latch to start up the sparks, then did the same with the other. He observed the little needle jumping in place on the meters, slightly increasing. He walked in between them to make sure they followed the same tempo, which they did. When he had made sure that Anleika was asleep, he pushed in a cylinder next to the meters dampening the escalation current in both mechanisms. Then he walked away to the wall where the crank to the chain was and started raising up the glass panel above her, beyond the reach of the sparks. He stopped there for a moment. He was indeed frightened. He knew that much. But if he tried to suppress that fear, he noticed that in reality, he was just curious. He smirked a bit to himself and sighed in relief. He walked back to the machines and released the suppressors, letting the sparks flow. At the tip, they started to grow, reaching out more and more to touch whatever was accessible. They did not reach far at first, but he did not intend to stop their escalating power. He became frightened again, but the emotion ran off him when he realized he could not see beyond the panels of mirrors at Anleika's sleeping body. He instead continued to watch the sparks, reaching all the way up into the roof. He backed away to the door. They jumped to the top of the encircling panel of mirrors, as well as within it. Larger and larger, brighter and brighter. More and more of them furiously spewed out of the machine, and he was just about to exit the room when he saw something. In the myriad of lightning streaks in the room, a shape seemed to attract them. Their wild dance and random pattern seemed to come in contact with something. Like how they touched the objects around them. A few of them had started touching something he could not see. More and more of them did so, until it seemed like they all made out a single bolt of light, looking like an arm reaching down at Anleika. Then everything exploded before him in a bright flash. He was thrown against the door, and the force pushed everything in the room to the walls as well. A mirror having separated from the panels crashed into the wall right next to him, and he felt some of its pieces land on him. He cowered with his arms shielding his face. When he removed them, the opposite wall had completely been blown out. He was unsure of his mental and physical state at what he saw. Not the havoc he had caused, but the massive, multi-limbed arm reaching into the room, attached to a creature sitting atop the roof of the adjacent building. It held a finger straight onto Anleika's forehead, where she lay still and intact, preserved on the untouched bed. He scrambled to his feet, unsure if all of it was a dream. The arm retracted back out from the building, and he walked up to the massive hole in the wall. He was speechless. It struck him that he was also not afraid. This was it. The godhead was right before his eyes. A massive body with many arms, like a spider, clung to the building. It had a bean-shaped head, filled with cavities and holes, exposing a mass of 1,000 eyes within. He looked down to the street below, where the ant-like people seemed more interested in the blown out roof than the arrival of a god. Funny, some people are just more graced than others, he thought. Just like Lawrence, the first vicar had shown, all it took was the right man to make the right choice. Tonitrus, a unique trick weapon contrived by Archibald, the infamous eccentric of the Healing Church workshop. Striking this peculiar iron morning star flail like a match generates the same blue sparks that blanket a dark beast. Unfortunately, for reasons untold, the hunters of Archibald's time did not fully take to the device.